The office buzzed with energy as people hurried back and forth carrying cables, adjusting lights, and testing microphones. It was one of those days when everyone felt important, like they were part of something big. At the center of it all was Karoline Leavitt, a young journalist known for her sharp questions and relentless drive to uncover the truth. Today, she believed, would be the highlight of her career. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, an exclusive interview with Michelle Obama, the former First Lady of the United States. Karoline stood by her desk going over her notes one last time. Her heart raced with excitement. This wasn't just any interview. It was a chance to ask meaningful questions about leadership, policy, and inspiration. She wanted to make sure every word counted. Around her, the crew worked tirelessly. Cameras were set up on tripods and bright spotlights illuminated the area where Michelle Obama would sit. Everything had to be perfect. As Karoline flipped through her notebook, she noticed Richard Dawson walking toward her. Richard was her boss, the head of the news division at their company. He was a tall man with graying hair and a stern expression that often made people uneasy. Today, though, his face looked different, almost troubled. Karoline straightened up, sensing that something was off. "Karoline," Richard said, stopping a few feet away from her. His voice was calm but firm. "Can we talk for a moment?" She nodded, closing her notebook and following him to a quieter corner of the office. Her stomach tightened as she wondered what he might say. Had there been a change in plans? Was Michelle Obama running late? Nothing could have prepared her for what came next. "Listen," Richard began, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. "There's been a development." He paused, searching for the right words. "Corporate has decided to make some changes to the lineup for today's interview." Karoline frowned, confusion washing over her. "What kind of changes?" she asked, her voice steady despite the unease building inside her. "They've chosen someone else to conduct the interview," Richard explained quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Vanessa Miller will take your place." For a moment, Karoline couldn't process what she'd heard. Vanessa Miller? The name echoed in her mind. Vanessa was a senior anchor at the network, known for her polished demeanor and ability to stick to scripts without straying into controversial territory. But why would they replace her now, after all the work she'd done? "Why?" Karoline demanded, her voice rising slightly. "I've been working on this for weeks. I know the material better than anyone." Richard sighed, clearly uncomfortable. "It's not my decision, Karoline. They feel Vanessa aligns better with the brand image they're trying to project. You understand how these things go?" "No, I don't understand," Karoline shot back, anger bubbling to the surface. "This isn't fair. I earned this opportunity." "I'm sorry," Richard said, his tone softening. "Believe me, I fought for you. But sometimes decisions come down from higher up and there's nothing we can do about them." Karoline clenched her fists, fighting back tears of frustration. She knew arguing wouldn't change anything, but the injustice of it all stung deeply. After all her hard work, all her preparation, she was being pushed aside like it didn't matter. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay composed. "Fine," she said finally, her voice cold. "If that's how it's going to be, then I'll step aside. But don't expect me to pretend I'm okay with it." Without waiting for a response, Karoline turned and walked away, leaving Richard standing alone in the corner. Heads turned as she passed by, and whispers spread like wildfire among the staff. Everyone knew what had happened, or at least they thought they did. Some offered sympathetic glances, while others avoided meeting her eyes altogether. Back at her desk, Karoline grabbed her bag and started shoving her belongings inside. She didn't want to stick around and watch Vanessa waltz in and take over her hard-earned spotlight. As she packed, she couldn't help but replay the conversation, with Richard in her mind. Something about it didn't add up. Why would corporate suddenly decide to switch hosts at the last minute? And why Vanessa, of all people? Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. Looking up, she saw Vanessa entering the room, flanked by two assistants, carrying stacks of papers. Vanessa gave her a polite smile, but Karoline didn't return it. Instead, she slung her bag over her shoulder and headed for the exit. Before she reached the door, however, she stopped and glanced back at the scene unfolding behind her. Vanessa was already seated at the desk, reviewing questions and nodding, along as someone briefed her on the schedule. The rest of the team carried on as if nothing unusual had happened. To them, Karoline realized this was just another day at the office, a minor hiccup in an otherwise routine assignment. But to Karoline, it felt like betrayal. She stepped out into the hallway, letting the heavy glass door close behind her. For a moment, she leaned against the wall, taking slow, deliberate breaths. She needed to clear her head, to figure out what to do next. Little did she know, the real drama was only beginning. Back in the office, chaos erupted mere minutes after she left. Phones rang nonstop, and frantic voices filled the air. Security. Guards appeared unexpectedly, ushering people out of the building. Rumors flew about mass firings and mysterious orders from above. By the end of the day, nearly everyone involved in planning the Michelle Obama segment, including Richard Dawson, was gone. Karoline, still reeling from her own dismissal, would soon find herself drawn into a web of secrets far darker than she'd ever imagined. What started as a personal disappointment was about to become a fight for justice and maybe even survival. Karoline stood outside the building, leaning against the cold glass wall as her mind raced. She felt angry, hurt, and humiliated all at once. Replacing her at the last minute wasn't just unfair, it was cruel. But deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was going on. Why would corporate suddenly decide to switch hosts? And why Vanessa Miller, who rarely dealt with hard-hitting interviews? Before she could think too much about it, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Alex Carter, an intern she had been working closely with on the Michelle Obama segment. Alex was young but incredibly smart, especially when it came to technology. He often helped Karoline dig up information or troubleshoot technical issues. "Hey, Karoline," Alex said when she answered. His voice sounded shaky. "Are you still here? Something weird is happening inside." "What do you mean?" Karoline asked, straightening up. I don't even know how to explain it. Just come back in, quick." Frowning, Karoline pushed off the wall and headed back toward the entrance. When she stepped inside, the atmosphere was completely different from when she'd left just minutes earlier. People were rushing around, talking loudly and looking panicked. Phones rang nonstop, and security guards seemed to appear out of nowhere. Standing by doors and watching everyone closely, Alex met her near the reception desk. His face was pale, and he motioned for her to follow him into a quieter corner. "What's going on?" Karoline whispered, glancing around. "It's crazy," Alex replied. "Richard got a call from corporate. They didn't just replace you. They fired almost everyone involved in planning this interview." Karoline's eyes widened. "What? Everyone?" Alex nodded. "Yeah. Editors, producers, assistants, everyone, even Richard. They're being escorted out right now." As if to confirm his words, Karoline saw Richard Dawson walking briskly down the hallway, flanked by 2 security guards. His shoulders were slumped, and he looked defeated. Behind him, others followed, carrying boxes filled with their personal belongings. Some looked angry, while others appeared dazed, as if they couldn't believe what was happening. "What reason did they give?" Karoline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No one knows," Alex admitted. "But there's talk about protocol violations, whatever that means." Karoline frowned. Protocol violations? That didn't make sense. Sure, mistakes happen sometimes, but firing an entire team over something vague like that seemed extreme. Unless there was more to it than anyone realized. "Did you notice anything unusual before this happened?" Karoline asked Alex. He hesitated, then lowered his voice even further. "Actually, yeah. Earlier today I was reviewing some files for the interview setup. There were these weird symbols embedded in the background props. At first I thought it was just part of the design, but now I'm not so sure." "Weird symbols?" Karoline repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I don't know exactly," Alex admitted. "They looked kind of like codes or logos. I didn't think much of it until everything started falling apart. Karoline's mind raced. Symbols? Codes? This was starting to sound less like a simple workplace mishap and more like something out of a conspiracy thriller. But she needed proof before jumping to conclusions. "Do you still have access to those files?" she asked. Alex nodded. "Yeah, but we need to be careful. If whoever did this finds out we're poking around—" "They won't," Karoline interrupted firmly. "We'll keep it quiet. For now." Together they slipped into an empty meeting room and closed the door behind them. Alex pulled out his laptop and quickly logged into the company's internal system. As he navigated through folders, Karoline watched intently, her heart pounding in her chest. "There," Alex said finally, pointing to a document labeled Set Design Specs. Opening it, they saw detailed plans for the stage where Michelle Obama was supposed to sit. Sure enough, small symbols were embedded in various parts of the design, on banners, podiums, and even the backdrop. "These weren't in the original designs," Karoline murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "Who added them?" "I don't know," Alex replied, "but whoever it was, they used admin-level access. That means someone high up authorized it." Karoline stared at the symbols, trying to make sense of them. They looked abstract, almost random, but she had a gut feeling they meant something important. Maybe they were a clue to why the team had been fired. "We need to find out more," she said after a moment. "Can you trace who made these changes?" Alex hesitated. "I can try, but it'll take time, and if I get caught—" "You won't get caught," Karoline assured him. "Just be careful." As Alex worked, Karoline paced the room, her thoughts swirling. Something big was happening, and she was determined to uncover the truth. Losing her spot as the interviewer suddenly felt insignificant compared to what might be unfolding right under their noses. After several tense minutes, Alex let out a soft gasp. "Got it," he said, turning the laptop toward Karoline. On the screen was a list of user activity logs showing who had accessed the set design files. One name stood out: Gregory Hale, the head of operations for the network. "Gregory Hale?" Karoline muttered, recognizing the name immediately. "Why would he tamper with the set design?" "I don't know," Alex admitted. "But look at this." He clicked on another file, revealing emails between Gregory and someone using an anonymous account. The messages were cryptic, mentioning phrases like ensure alignment and maintain control. "This has to mean something," Karoline said, her voice tinged with urgency. "Whatever this is, it's not just about me getting replaced. It's about the whole interview." Before they could discuss it further, the door to the meeting room burst open. Two security guards stood in the doorway, their expressions grim. "You two," one of them barked. "Come with us." "Karoline," and Alex exchanged a panicked glance. Had they been discovered? Without hesitation, Karoline grabbed the laptop and shoved it into Alex's bag. "Run," she whispered urgently. They bolted past the guards, dodging startled employees and weaving through narrow hallways. Adrenaline surged through Karoline's veins as she pushed herself to move faster. Behind them, the guards shouted, their footsteps growing louder. "This way," Alex called, pulling her toward a service exit. They burst through the door and found themselves in a dimly lit alleyway. The cool night air hit them like a shock, but they didn't stop running. Not until they reached a safe distance from the building. Breathing heavily, Karoline leaned against a brick wall, her mind racing. What had they stumbled into? And why were people willing to go to such lengths to keep it hidden? For the first time in her life, Karoline realized she wasn't just chasing a story, she was fighting for survival. Karoline and Alex finally stopped running when they reached an old apartment building on the outskirts of the city. It belonged to Emily Dawson, Alex's cousin, who was known for her obsession with conspiracy theories. She lived alone, rarely, interacted with others, and spent most of her time researching shadowy organizations that supposedly controlled governments and media. Normally, Karoline would have dismissed such ideas as paranoia, but after what had just happened, she wasn't so sure anymore. Alex knocked on the door 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more, a secret signal they had agreed upon earlier. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing Emily. She was a petite woman in her late 20s with messy brown hair tied back in a loose bun. Her sharp green eyes scanned them quickly before ushering them inside. "You didn't bring anyone with you, did you?" Emily asked sharply, closing the door behind them. "No," Karoline replied, still catching her breath. "But we might not be safe here for long." Emily nodded grimly and led them into a small living room converted into a makeshift research hub. The walls were covered with maps, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes connected by red string. In the center of the room stood a table cluttered with laptops, tablets, and stacks of documents. It looked chaotic, but Karoline could tell there was a method to the madness. "Tell me everything," Emily said, sitting down at one of the computers. 4. The next hour, Karoline and Alex explained everything that had happened. The sudden replacement, the firings, the strange symbols, and their narrow escape from the security guards. As they spoke, Emily listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes or pulling up files on her computer. When they finished, Emily leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. "This isn't random," she said finally. "It's too organized, too precise. Someone doesn't want you asking questions." "But why us?" Karoline asked. "Why target an interview with Michelle Obama?" Emily hesitated before answering. "Because it's not really about her. Or maybe it is, but not in the way you think. There's a group I've been tracking for years. The Directive. They manipulate high-profile events to control public opinion. If Michelle Obama said something controversial, or even inspiring, they could lose control of the narrative. That's why they staged this whole thing." "The Directive?" Karoline repeated, skeptical. "You're saying some secret organization controls the media?" "It sounds crazy, I know," Emily admitted. "But trust me, these people exist, and if they find out you're onto them—" She trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Karoline glanced at Alex, who looked equally stunned. None of this made sense, yet it was hard to deny the evidence piling up around them. The symbols, the firings, the encrypted messages, it all pointed to something far bigger than any of them had imagined. "What do we do now?" Alex asked quietly. "We dig deeper," Emily replied. "If you've already uncovered part of their operation, we need to expose the rest. But we have to be careful. These people don't play nice." Over the next few hours, the trio worked tirelessly, combing through files and decrypting data. Emily proved invaluable, using advanced software to bypass firewalls and access restricted areas of the company's servers. Slowly but surely, they began piecing together the truth. One breakthrough came when Emily found a hidden folder labeled Project Horizon. Inside were detailed plans outlining how the network intended to use the Michelle Obama interview to promote a new global surveillance initiative. Documents revealed that the initiative had been pushed by powerful politicians and corporate leaders who claimed it was necessary for national security. Critics argued it was a step toward authoritarianism, stripping away privacy rights under the guise of protection. "This is insane," Karoline muttered, scrolling through the files. They weren't just staging an interview, they were planning to brainwash millions of people. And they almost got away with it, Emily added darkly. Another discovery came when Alex managed to trace the anonymous emails back to a private server located in Switzerland. While they couldn't identify the sender directly, the metadata suggested connections to several major corporations and government agencies. "They're everywhere," Alex said, shaking his head. "How do we fight something like this?" "One step at a time," Karoline replied firmly. "We gather enough evidence to expose them. Then we release it to the world." By the time morning arrived, exhaustion weighed heavily on all three of them, but they had accomplished more than they ever thought possible. They had proof, not just speculation, that the directive existed and that it was manipulating events on a massive scale. Now the challenge was figuring out how to share the information without getting caught. As they reviewed their findings, Karoline felt a mix of fear and determination. Exposing the directive wouldn't be easy, and it certainly wouldn't be safe. But she knew one thing for certain: staying silent wasn't an option. "Let's go over this again," she said, standing up and pacing the room. "We need to make sure every detail is clear. Every piece of evidence has to be bulletproof." Emily nodded. "And we'll need a plan to distribute it." social media, independent news outlets, anything that can't be easily shut down. For the first time since the chaos began, Karoline allowed herself a small smile. She didn't know what lay ahead, but she was ready to face it head on. Whatever happened next, she vowed to keep fighting. For the truth, for justice, and for everyone who deserved to know the real story behind the lies. Little did she know the directive was already watching. The days that followed were a blur of late nights, endless cups of coffee, and constant paranoia. Karoline, Alex, and Emily worked around the clock, piecing together every shred of evidence they could find about the directive. Their makeshift headquarters, Emily's cramped apartment, became a fortress of secrets with blinds drawn tight and laptops humming softly in the background. They knew they were running out of time. If the directive discovered what they were doing, there would be no second chances. Karoline spent hours reviewing the files they had uncovered, her eyes scanning page after page of incriminating documents. Each new revelation made her stomach churn. The directive wasn't just manipulating media events, it was orchestrating global policies, silencing dissenting voices, and controlling the flow of information to shape public opinion. What started as a simple interview replacement had spiraled into something far more sinister, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. One evening, while Alex sifted through encrypted emails, he stumbled upon something shocking. "Guys, you need to see this," he said, his voice trembling slightly. Karoline and Emily hurried over, leaning in to look at the screen. On it was a recording of a private meeting between top government officials and corporate leaders. The conversation was chilling. They discussed how to use Michelle Obama's popularity against her, framing her as either a hero or a villain depending on whether she aligned with their agenda. The goal was clear: manipulate public perception to push their controversial surveillance initiative. They didn't care about her message, Karoline whispered, anger bubbling inside her. They only cared about controlling it. Emily nodded grimly. This proves everything. They're not just influencing events, they're rewriting reality. As they continued digging, they found even more disturbing details. Hidden within the files were lists of names, politicians, celebrities, journalists, all secretly working with the directive. Some were unaware of the full extent of its operations, while others actively participated in its schemes. It was a web of corruption, so vast that exposing it felt almost impossible. But Karoline refused to give up. She reminded herself why she became a journalist in the first place: to uncover the truth and hold those in power accountable. This was bigger than her career, bigger than any single story. It was about protecting freedom and ensuring people had access to real information. "We need to release this," Karoline said firmly one night, breaking the silence. "We can't keep it hidden anymore." "Are you sure?" Alex asked nervously. "If we go public, they'll come after us." "I know," Karoline replied. "But if we don't, they win. We have enough evidence to blow this wide open. All we need is a way to get it out there without them shutting us down." Emily thought for a moment before speaking. "We'll need to distribute it across multiple platforms simultaneously. Social media, independent news sites, forums, anywhere they can't easily control. And we should encrypt the files so they can't be traced back to us." Over the next few days, they prepared their plan meticulously. They compiled all the evidence into a single digital archive, encrypting it with layers of security. Then, using anonymous accounts, they uploaded copies to various cloud services and shared links with trusted contacts who could help spread the word. The final step was creating a video message from Karoline to accompany the release. Sitting in front of a plain white wall, she recorded herself explaining everything they had uncovered. Her tone was calm but urgent, her words carefully chosen to convey both the gravity of the situation and the importance of staying vigilant. "This isn't just about me or my team," she said, looking directly into the camera. "It's about everyone who deserves to know the truth. Powerful organizations are manipulating our lives, controlling what we see and hear. But together, we can fight back. Share this message. Demand answers. Hold them accountable." When the video was ready, they set a date for the release exactly 1 week later. That gave them enough time to ensure everything was in place while minimizing the risk of detection. As the days passed, tension grew thicker in the air. Every knock on the door made them jump. Every phone call sent shivers down their spines. They took turns sleeping, always keeping someone awake to monitor for signs of trouble. Despite the fear, there was also a sense of purpose. For the first time in weeks, Karoline felt like she was truly making a difference. On the morning of the release, they gathered in Emily's living room, staring at the countdown timer on one of the laptops. It ticked down slowly, each second, feeling like an eternity. "What happens next?" Alex asked quietly. "I don't know," Karoline admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." Finally, the timer hit 0. With shaking hands, Emily pressed the button to activate the release. Within seconds, the files and video began spreading across the internet. Hashtags started trending on social media, and messages poured in from people around the world expressing outrage and support. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to feel hopeful. The truth was out there now, and there was no turning back. But their relief was short-lived. Barely an hour later, the lights in Emily's apartment flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed outside the door. Someone was coming. The sound of footsteps outside Emily's apartment door sent a wave of panic through the room. Karoline's heart raced as she glanced at Alex and Emily, both frozen in place. Whoever was coming wasn't here for a friendly visit. They had been careful, too careful, or so they thought. But now it seemed their precautions hadn't been enough. "We need to move, now," Karoline whispered urgently, grabbing the laptop and shoving it into her backpack along with a USB drive containing all their evidence. Emily nodded, already heading toward the back window. "There's a fire escape. We can get out that way." Without hesitation, the three of them scrambled to the window, throwing it open and climbing onto the rickety metal ladder. The cold night air hit them like a slap, but there was no time to waste. As they descended into the alley below, the front door of the apartment burst open with a loud crash. Voices shouted inside, followed by heavy footsteps stomping through the rooms. Karoline's breath came in short gasps as they ran down the narrow alley, sticking to the shadows. She didn't dare look back, knowing that doing so would only slow them down. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these people? How had they found them so quickly? And what would happen if they caught up? "They're coming," Alex hissed, glancing over his shoulder. Sure enough, dark figures emerged from the building behind them, moving fast. Their faces were hidden under hoods, but the flashlights in their hands cut through the darkness like knives. Karoline pushed herself harder, her legs burning from the effort. Ahead, Emily spotted a side street and motioned for them to follow. "This way," she called softly, darting between two parked cars and disappearing into the wider road. The trio zigzagged through the deserted streets, ducking into doorways and alleys whenever they heard footsteps close by. Adrenaline kept them going, even as exhaustion threatened to pull them down. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, they finally reached a small cafe that Emily claimed was safe. It was closed for the night, but she knocked on the door in a specific pattern until a sleepy-looking man opened it. "Get inside," he muttered, ushering them in without asking questions. Once they were safely inside, Karoline collapsed onto a chair, her chest heaving. Alex leaned against the wall, pale and shaking, while Emily locked the door and drew the curtains. For a moment, none of them spoke, each trying to process what had just happened. "They knew where we were," Alex said finally, breaking the silence. "How?" "I don't know," Emily replied, pacing back and forth. "But it means they've got someone watching us. Maybe tracking our devices or intercepting communications." Karoline frowned, pulling the backpack closer to her chest. "Then we need to ditch everything. Phones, laptops, anything they could use to trace us." Reluctantly, they agreed. Emily handed over burner phones she had prepared earlier, explaining how to use them securely. They destroyed their old devices, smashing them into pieces and scattering the remains in different trash bins far from the cafe. As dawn approached, they regrouped to discuss their next move. With their initial plan compromised, they needed a new strategy, one that wouldn't lead the directive straight to them. "We have to split up," Emily suggested. "It's too dangerous for all of us to stay together. If they catch one of us, the others can still finish the job." "No," Karoline said firmly. "We stick together. We're stronger as a team." Alex hesitated before speaking. "She's right, though. If we separate, we'll be harder to track. Plus, we can cover more ground." Karoline wanted to argue, but deep down, she knew they were right. Staying together made them an easier target. Reluctantly, she nodded. "Fine. But we meet back here in 2 days, no matter what." With their plan set, they divided the remaining supplies and went their separate ways. Karoline took the main copy of the evidence, hiding it in a waterproof pouch strapped to her waist. Alex carried backup files, while Emily kept a detailed map of potential safe houses marked across the city. Karoline wandered the streets alone, blending into the early morning crowd. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone who passed by. Every car that slowed nearby made her heart skip a beat, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Still, she pressed on, determined to survive long enough to see this through. Her first stop was a library, a public place where she could blend in while checking for updates online. Using a computer station in the corner, she logged into one of their anonymous accounts. To her relief, the message had spread further than she expected. Thousands of people were sharing the video and discussing the evidence. Protest hashtags trended globally, and independent news outlets picked up the story. But not everyone believed it. Some dismissed the claims as conspiracy theories, while others accused Karoline and her team of fabricating the information. Despite the skepticism, the sheer volume of attention made it impossible for the directive to ignore. Already, lawmakers were calling for investigations, and protests erupted in major cities around the world. Encouraged by the response, Karoline uploaded another message, urging people to demand transparency and accountability. "Don't let them silence us," she wrote. "Keep asking questions. Keep fighting for the truth." As she typed, a security guard approached, eyeing her suspiciously. Karoline quickly logged out and slipped away, her nerves on edge. She couldn't afford to stay in one place for too long. Later that day, she met Alex at a prearranged location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. He arrived breathless, carrying a duffel bag filled with food and water. "They're everywhere," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "I saw agents tailing me near the train station. I barely lost them." Karoline nodded grimly. "Same here. They're closing in." Before they could decide their next step, Emily appeared, looking disheveled but alive. "I found something," she said, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper. On it was a list of names, people who might be willing to help. "These are whistleblowers, activists, journalists. If we reach out to them, maybe they can amplify the message." "It's risky," Karoline said. "What if they're being watched too?" "It's our best shot," Emily replied. "We can't do this alone." Agreeing, they spent the rest of the day contacting trusted allies, sending encrypted messages and coordinating efforts. Slowly but surely, a network began to form, a loose coalition united by a shared desire for justice. By the time night fell again, Karoline felt a spark of hope reignite within her. The fight was far from over, but they weren't alone anymore. Together, they stood a chance against the directive and the corrupt systems it sought to protect. Little did they know, their actions had already triggered a chain reaction. Powerful figures within the directive were scrambling to contain the ideal fallout, arresting key members and destroying evidence. The organization's grip on power was weakening, but it wouldn't go down without a fight. For Karoline, Alex, and Emily, the hardest battles still lay ahead. But one thing was certain. They had ignited a movement that couldn't be extinguished. The final days of their fight against the directive were a whirlwind of chaos, courage, and determination. Karoline, Alex, and Emily worked tirelessly, coordinating with their growing network of allies to keep the momentum alive. Protesters filled the streets and cities around the world, holding signs that read, "Truth matters," and "Expose the lies." Independent journalists amplified their story, ensuring it reached every corner of the globe. For the first time, Karoline felt like they were making real progress. But the directive wasn't giving up without a fight. Agents continued to hunt them down, forcing the trio to stay constantly on the move. They slept in safe houses, abandoned buildings, and even cars when necessary. Food was scarce, and exhaustion weighed heavily on all of them. Yet, despite the challenges, they refused to back down. One morning, as Karoline scrolled through updates on her burner phone, she noticed something alarming. Several high-profile arrests had been made, members of the directive accused of corruption and conspiracy. At first glance, it seemed like a victory, but then she saw the headlines. Whistleblowers arrested for spreading false information. Some of the very people who had joined their cause were now being silenced, framed as liars by those still loyal to the directive. "They're trying to discredit us," Karoline said grimly, showing Alex and Emily the news articles. "If they can convince people we're lying, they'll regain control." "We need to go bigger," Emily replied. "Something undeniable, something they can't spin." Karoline nodded slowly, an idea forming in her mind. A live broadcast. Me telling the whole story directly to the public. No filters, no edits, just me. Alex looked worried. "That's risky. If they find you—" "I know," Karoline interrupted. "But if I don't do this, they win. This is our chance to make sure everyone hears the truth." After hours of planning, they chose a location for the broadcast, a rooftop in the heart of the city with a clear view of the protests below. It was risky, but the symbolism would be powerful. Karoline wanted the world to see not just her words, but the movement she had helped inspire. When the day arrived, Karoline climbed onto the rooftop at sunrise, her heart pounding in her chest. Alex and Emily stayed hidden nearby, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. Using a portable hotspot and a secure connection, she began streaming live to social media platforms. Within minutes, thousands of people tuned in, then tens of thousands, then millions. "Hello," Karoline began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "My name is Karoline Leavitt, and I'm here to tell you the truth about what's happening behind closed doors. A shadowy organization known as the Directive has been manipulating events, controlling narratives, and silencing anyone who dares to speak out. They've used fear, lies, and intimidation to maintain their power. But today we're taking that power back." She went on to explain everything: the firings, the symbols, the encrypted files, the lists of names. She showed screenshots of documents and played snippets of audio recordings. Each piece of evidence added weight to her claims, making it harder for skeptics to dismiss her as a conspiracy theorist. "This isn't just my fight anymore," Karoline continued. "It's ours. Together, we've exposed corruption at the highest levels. Now, it's up to us to hold these people accountable, demand investigations, support independent journalism, and most importantly, never stop asking questions." As she spoke, the camera panned to the streets below, where protesters cheered and held up signs supporting her message. The sight brought tears to Karoline's eyes. She had started this journey alone, humiliated and angry, but now she stood, alongside millions of others fighting for justice. Minutes after the broadcast ended, the impact became clear. News outlets that had previously ignored or ridiculed the story began covering it extensively. Politicians called for emergency hearings, and citizens flooded social media with calls for reform. The Directive's carefully constructed facade was crumbling under the weight of public outrage, but the victory came at a cost. As Karoline packed up her equipment, preparing to leave the rooftop, a swarm of black SUVs surrounded the building. Agents poured out, armed and dangerous. Before she could react, Alex and Emily appeared, pulling her toward a waiting van. "We have to go, now," Alex shouted, throwing open the door. They sped off into the distance, narrowly escaping capture. Over the next few weeks, they remained in hiding, knowing that the Directive wouldn't stop until they were silenced. Despite the constant danger, Karoline refused to abandon her mission. She continued releasing smaller updates, keeping the pressure on. In time, the tide turned. Key members of the Directive were arrested, their crimes exposed to the world. reforms, were implemented to increase transparency and protect free speech. While the battle wasn't fully won, the foundation of the directive's power had been shattered. For Karoline, life returned to some semblance of normalcy, but it was a different kind of normal. She became a symbol of resistance, celebrated for her bravery and determination. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities poured in, but she declined most of them. Her focus remained on investigative journalism, shining a light on the dark corners of society. Alex returned to school, inspired to pursue a career in cybersecurity. Emily disappeared from the public eye, continuing her research quietly. Though their paths diverged, the bond they shared remained unbreakable. As Karoline stood on another rooftop months later, watching the sun rise over the city, she reflected on everything that had happened. She had lost so much, her job, her safety, her peace of mind, but she had gained something far greater. Hope. Hope that the truth could prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as long as there were people willing to fight for it, she knew the truth would always find a way.